A 9-year-old boy paid the bus fare for a poor woman. Next day, a luxury car was waiting for. Imagine being just 9 years old, clutching your last dollar in a cold, crowded city bus. You're hungry, maybe even a little scared, but you hold on to that dollar like it's your lifeline. Now imagine seeing someone else in need, someone who looks lost, hurt, and humiliated, and deciding to give away the only thing you have left. What would drive a child to make such a selfless choice? And what if, the very next day, something extraordinary happened that changed everything? This is the story of Tyrese, a young boy from Southfield, whose small act of kindness on a chilly morning set off a chain reaction no one could have predicted. It's not just about what he gave. It's about how his courage touched lives far beyond his own. This is also the story of Nia, a woman struggling through her darkest hour, and Marcus, a father working tirelessly to keep his family afloat while carrying the weight of dreams deferred. Together, their paths intertwine in ways that remind us of the power of empathy, dignity, and human connection. The morning started like any other for Tyrese. The grey clouds hung low over Southfield, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks and rusted fences. Inside their modest apartment, the smell of boiling water filled the air as Marcus paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. He was trying to reach Miss Dolores, their elderly neighbor who had promised to walk Tyrese to school that day. But Miss Dolores wasn't answering, and time was running out. Marcus needed to catch the bus to an important job interview, an opportunity that could finally bring some stability to their lives. With no other options, he made the hardest decision a parent can face, letting his son ride the bus alone for the first time. Marcus handed Tyrese a $1 bill, worn soft from years of use. "This will get you on the bus," he said, his voice tight with worry. "Don't lose it. Don't spend it on snacks. Eat that pizza at school, okay?" Tyrese nodded, gripping the bill tightly in his small hand. As he stepped out into the biting cold, backpack bouncing against his shoulders, Marcus watched him go with a knot of guilt tightening in his chest. He knew the world didn't always see black children as innocent or deserving of protection, but survival demanded sacrifices, and this was one Marcus couldn't avoid. When Tyrese boarded the bus, the driver barely glanced at him. A middle-aged man with sagging features and a permanent scowl etched onto his face. The boy took his seat near the back, clutching his backpack like a shield. Outside, the city blurred past. Chain-link fences, cracked sidewalks, people weighed down by life's burdens. Inside, the heater clicked noisily, and the silence amongst passengers felt heavy, almost oppressive. For a moment, Tyrese thought about the pizza waiting for him at school, the gooey cheese, the crispy crust. But then, at the fourth stop, something shifted. A woman stepped onto the bus, hesitating as if unsure she belonged there. Her coat was too thin for the weather, torn at the cuffs and streaked with mud. There was blood on her cheekbone, faint but unmistakable. She fumbled in her pockets, searching for fare, but came up empty. "I lost my wallet," she whispered, her voice calm despite the desperation in her eyes. "I just need to get to Midtown Medical. I can pay later, I swear." The driver sneered, leaning back in his seat. "You people always got a story," he muttered, dismissing her without a second thought. Tyrese flinched at those words, familiar yet painful. They echoed the same dismissive tone he'd heard before, in stores, in classrooms, in places where people looked at him and saw not a child, but a stereotype. No one moved to help. Passengers stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact, trapped by the unspoken rule of city life. Don't get involved. But Tyrese wasn't like the others. At 9 years old, he cared more than he should have been expected to. He reached into his pocket, remembering the dollar tucked inside. His stomach churned, not from hunger this time, but from the weight of the decision ahead. That dollar represented not just breakfast, but pride, dignity, hope. Yet somehow, he knew what he had to do. Standing up, his legs trembling, Tyrese walked to the front of the bus. Holding out the crumpled bill, he said firmly, "I'll pay for her." The driver blinked, taken aback. "For her ride?" Tyrese nodded, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Behind him, a cough broke the silence, followed by the sound of coins clinking. An old man near the back tossed a few nickels. Into the tray, a woman murmured, "Let the boy." Her voice cracked, trailing off into the quiet. The driver snatched the dollar from Tyrese's hand. Waving the woman on with an irritated grunt, she walked down the aisle slowly, her face flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. When she paused beside Tyrese, tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Tyrese didn't respond. He simply nodded and returned to his seat, heart pounding, so loudly he thought everyone could hear it. What Tyrese didn't know was that this seemingly simple act of kindness would ripple outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't yet understand. The woman, Nia, carried the memory of that moment with her long after the bus ride ended. And the next morning, when a sleek black SUV pulled up outside Bravo Elementary, nobody could have guessed why or how it had arrived there. Was it coincidence, fate, or something else entirely? One thing was certain. Tyrese's world was about to change forever. As we dive deeper into this story, we'll uncover the threads connecting these characters, how one act of generosity became a catalyst for transformation. We'll explore themes of resilience, compassion, and the unseen impact of our choices. But first, let's pause here. Leaving Tyrese standing outside his school, unaware of the luxury car waiting nearby. Who does it belong to? Why are they here? And what role will Tyrese play in what happens next? Stay tuned to find out as the sleek SUV idled outside Bravo Elementary. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd of parents and students. The vehicle stood out like a sore thumb in this neighborhood, its polished exterior gleaming under the pale morning sun, contrasting sharply with the rusted minivans and dented sedans that usually lined the curb. Nia stepped out of the car, her movements deliberate but tinged with nervous energy. She adjusted her scarf, ensuring it covered the faint bruise on her cheekbone, one last mark from the night she'd tried to forget. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse as she approached the school office, her heart pounding, not just from anxiety, but also from resolve. Inside, the secretary looked up with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. Nia smiled softly, though her eyes betrayed the weight she carried. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm looking for a student named Tyrese. He would have gotten off at the 6th and Grand stop yesterday morning. I believe he's in 3rd grade." The secretary raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And you are?" Nia hesitated only briefly before responding. "Someone who wants to thank him properly." The room seemed to hold its breath. The secretary glanced down at her keyboard, then back at Nia, weighing her words carefully. "We don't give out student information to non-family members," she said firmly, folding her arms across her chest. Before Nia could respond, a cough interrupted them. Standing in the doorway was Marcus, still wearing his delivery uniform, his face etched with exhaustion and concern. He had come to speak with the counselor about renewing Tyrese's lunch assistance program. But when he heard the name Tyrese, His blood ran cold. Now, here he was, staring at a woman he didn't recognize, yet somehow felt connected to. "I'm his dad," Marcus said, stepping forward, his voice low but clear. Nia turned slowly, her gaze locking onto his. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them crackled with unspoken understanding. Finally, she broke the silence. "You raised a remarkable kid," she said softly, her words carrying both gratitude and reverence. Marcus stiffened, his defenses rising instinctively. "Why? What happened?" His voice was sharp, almost accusatory, but beneath it lay a father's primal need to protect his son. Nia took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, piece by piece, she recounted the events of the previous day, the bus ride, the driver's cruelty, the dollar bill, and the napkin Tyrese had offered without hesitation. As she spoke, Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to something softer, more fragile. By the time she finished, his shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the world had settled on them. "I want to help," Nia said simply, her voice unwavering. "Just for this school year. A scholarship, some support, nothing more unless you want it." Marcus stared at her, his mind racing. Suspicion warred with hope within him. He knew better than to trust easily. Life had taught him that kindness often came with strings attached. Yet there was something in Nia's demeanor, her sincerity, her quiet determination, that made him pause. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded once, slowly, as if accepting a gift he hadn't dared to dream of. Unbeknownst to Tyrese, wheels were already turning behind the scenes. That same week, notices arrived at the school announcing a new scholarship fund for deserving students. Teachers whispered about anonymous donors, while administrators marveled at the sudden influx of resources. No one suspected Nia's involvement, not even Marcus, who assumed it was part of some larger initiative. All Tyrese knew was that his lunch tray now held 2 slices of pizza instead of 1, and for the first time in months, he didn't have to skip breakfast. The letter home explained it was based on character and need, but those words meant little to him. What mattered most was the look on his father's face when he read it. A mixture of disbelief, relief, and something deeper, quieter, like a burden finally lifting. Meanwhile, Nia worked tirelessly to ensure the changes weren't just temporary fixes. Through her connections at Vitech Med, she arranged an interview for Marcus, not charity, but a genuine opportunity. His years of odd jobs, technical training, and sheer grit impressed the hiring manager, and within weeks, Marcus found himself employed as a junior technician. The uniform they gave him bore his name stitched neatly over the heart, and when Tyrese saw it for the first time, his eyes widened in awe. It wasn't just fabric. It symbolized stability, pride, and the promise of a brighter future. Their lives transformed incrementally, each small victory building upon the last. They moved out of the drafty apartment on Ann Lennox into a modest 2-bedroom place near the school. The new apartment wasn't fancy, faded carpet, peeling paint, but it had heat that stayed on, and hot water that didn't run cold after 5 minutes. For Tyrese, it felt like a castle. Nia visited occasionally, bringing books or supplies, always careful not to overstay her welcome. She and Marcus exchanged few words during these visits, yet their shared understanding of life's hardships created a bond that needed no explanation. But even as their fortunes improved, questions lingered. Why had Nia gone so far out of her way to help them? And why did she seem so determined to remain anonymous? These thoughts gnawed at Marcus, though he never voiced them aloud. Instead, he focused on providing for his son, determined to make the most of this second chance. Tyrese, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the forces shaping his life. To him, the extra slice of pizza and the shiny new shoes were miracles bestowed by fate, not the result of someone else's extraordinary generosity. Months passed, and the story reached its crescendo during Bravo Elementary's annual Kindness Week assembly. Students were invited to share stories of people who had impacted their lives. And Tyrese stood nervously at the podium, clutching a crumpled note card. His voice trembled as he began, scanning the audience with wide eyes. "I don't know if what I did was that big," he admitted, his words halting but sincere. "I just saw someone who needed help, and I had something I could give. That's what my dad says. That even if it's small, if you can give it, you should." As Tyrese spoke, Nia sat quietly in the back of the room, beside Marcus, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tears glistened in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope, renewal, and redemption. When Tyrese finished, the auditorium erupted in applause, but Nia and Marcus remained silent, their connection transcending the noise around them. Yet, as the clapping subsided and the assembly drew to a close, a lingering question hung in the air. Had Tyrese truly understood the magnitude of his actions? And how far would Nia go to repay the debt she felt she owed? Not just to him, but to the world. The answers lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to unfold in ways no one could predict. Tyrese stepped away from the podium. The auditorium erupted into applause. He returned to his seat, his cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and relief, unaware that the story he had just shared would ripple far beyond the walls of Bravo Elementary. Nia sat quietly in the back, her hands clasped tightly together, her heart racing. She hadn't planned for this moment, hadn't anticipated how deeply it would affect her. But as she listened to Tyrese's words, simple, honest, and brimming with wisdom, she realized something profound. Kindness wasn't just an act, it was a chain reaction, one that could heal wounds both visible and invisible. After the assembly ended, Marcus approached Nia, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said simply, gesturing toward the school's quiet courtyard. They walked in silence, the crisp autumn air carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. When they finally stopped beneath a sprawling oak tree, Marcus turned to face her. "Why?" he asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "Why did you do all this? For us? For him?" Nia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because I needed to," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "That day on the bus, Tyrese gave me more than $1. He reminded me of who I used to be, someone who believed in doing what's right, no matter how small it seemed. And maybe I wanted to be that person again." Marcus studied her face, searching for answers he wasn't sure he'd find. Finally he nodded, slowly, accepting her explanation without pressing further. There was a mutual understanding between them now, an unspoken bond forged through hardship and hope. They didn't need to say much more. Their shared experiences spoke louder than words ever could. The days that followed brought subtle yet significant changes. The scholarship fund Nia established grew, thanks to donations from local businesses inspired by Tyrese's story. Teachers began incorporating lessons on empathy and resilience into their curriculum, encouraging students to recognize the power of small acts. Even the gruff bus driver who had once dismissed Nia found himself reflecting on his actions, eventually apologizing to her during a chance encounter at a grocery store. It wasn't redemption. It couldn't erase the past, But it was a start. For Tyrese, life continued to improve in ways he never imagined. His grades soared, fueled by confidence he hadn't known he possessed. At home, Marcus worked tirelessly, determined to provide stability while teaching his son the value of hard work and compassion. Together, they built routines filled with laughter, learning, and love. On weekends, they explored parks and libraries, discovering new worlds within the pages of borrowed books. For the first time in years, they felt like a family, not just surviving, but thriving. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Nia visited their apartment unannounced. She carried a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper, tied with twine. When Marcus opened the door, she handed it to him with a soft smile. Inside was a framed photograph of Tyrese standing beside the SUV on that fateful morning, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his face glowing with innocence and determination. Beneath the photo, engraved in elegant script, were the words, "Sometimes, the smallest light shines the brightest." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he traced the engraving with his fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "Not just for this, but for everything." Nia shook her head gently. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Thank Tyrese. He's the one who started it all." Later that night, as Tyrese prepared for bed, Marcus showed him the framed photo. The boy stared at it for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't get it," he said finally. "What did I do that was so special?" Marcus knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saw someone in need and gave them your last dollar. That might not seem like much to you, but to her, to all of us, it meant everything. You taught us that then when things are tough, we can still choose to be kind. And that makes all the difference." Tyrese smiled shyly, his young mind struggling to grasp the full weight of his father's words. But deep down, he understood. He had done something good, something brave, and though he didn't fully realize it yet, his act of kindness had sparked a transformation that touched countless lives, including his own. Weeks turned into months, and the connection between Tyrese, Marcus, and Nia remained steadfast. They weren't related by blood, but they shared a bond stronger than any familial tie. Nia continued visiting, bringing books, advice, and sometimes just companionship. Marcus, in turn, offered her friendship and support, reminding her that healing was possible, even after the darkest storms. As winter approached, Southfield transformed under a blanket of snow, its streets glistening like promises of renewal. One chilly afternoon, Tyrese stood at the bus stop, waiting for the familiar rumble of Route 14. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood his father, bundled in a warm coat, ready to accompany him wherever life might lead. The bus arrived, its doors hissing open, and Tyrese stepped aboard confidently, his head held high. He knew now that kindness wasn't about grand gestures or seeking recognition. It was about seeing others, truly seeing them, and choosing to make their world a little brighter. And as the bus rolled forward, carrying Tyrese and countless other passengers toward their destinations, the city itself seemed to exhale, a collective breath of hope, resilience, and humanity. Somewhere along the route, a woman sat quietly, clutching a napkin worn soft with use. She smiled to herself, knowing that the boy who had once given her his last dollar had grown into someone capable of changing the world, one small act at a time.